Hi lovely, welcome to the live. Please just drop me a comment and say hi if you're watching. I'd love to interact with you a little bit. And if you've got any questions throughout as we're talking about the HERstory of yoga, I'd love you to tap those away in the comments and I will hopefully reply to you in the live or get back to you after. Alrighty, so today I'm super excited to talk about this topic. I did actually study history at university, so whenever I get to nerd out, especially on yoga history, or HERstory as I'm calling this one, it's very exciting for me. So yeah, there's a lot of like patriarchal stuff that goes on in the history of yoga, so I'm going to dive a little bit into that and give a more feminist perspective or a HERstory version. So, the gurus in India have a lot of value in creating this sort of like unbroken ancient tradition of yoga where it's been passed down for thousands of years from like guru to guru through this specific lineage, because that just gives them so much like mysticism and authority and you can't even really question anything that they say because they'll just say that oh, my guru told me that, so that's the end of it, really. I remember when I was doing my teacher training, I just asked a really broad, open-ended question, is yoga different in any way for women than it might be for men? And the answer was no. And I was like, is it not a bit different when you're on your period? No. Okay, why? It's always been that way. Okay, end of conversation. Apparently I'll go get a book and work all of this out for myself, which is what I've been doing over the past few years, and here I am sharing the feminine approach to yoga. So yeah, they have a lot of invested interest in creating this sense of authority through this lineage of thousands of years. And on that note, yoga does sort of historically, they contextually date it back about 3,000 years, but they also claim that it's about 6,000 years as well, because it goes way back before written texts were even a thing. And there is evidence behind that, don't get me wrong, but the reality is with such an ancient practice that there's going to be a whole jumble of different traditions, cultures, influences all coming together to create these practices, and they're changing all the time. Every time, it's like Chinese whispers, every time it gets passed on to one person to another person to another person, it changes slightly. So the claim that the way that we've been practicing is an unbroken lineage of thousands of years is just not true, to be honest. I got told that when I was practicing Ashtanga Tristana, which is supposedly the only way of practicing asana according to the Vedas, which are the super ancient texts of yoga, that was the way to do it, the way it's always been done. And I've learned recently, a few months ago, that sun salutations actually only really came into existence in around the 1800s when the British Army came over to India. And the British were obviously interested in what yoga was and were trying to colonize and not do cool things, really. So the yogis sort of morphed these sun salutations, which when you think about it are very similar to a press up and everything, to try and connect to the British people and invite them into the yogic realm. Sun salutations are not an ancient practice. They do not come from the Vedas. They only come from a few hundred years ago. And that's not to say that there's not benefit in them. It's just to say that there's a lot of tosh, really, that goes around about these ancient practices, and most of it's not true. So that is why the sort of feminine approach to yoga is to feel your body, to listen to your body, and to let these practices come kind of authentically through you, instead of trying to copy exactly what the teacher says. So as much as in my online course, for example, I give you lots of practices and places to start, but that's all they are. They're just places to start and places to get you sort of familiar with the yogic movements, specifically for menstrual healing. But by the end of the course, I'd love you to be thinking about taking those training wheels off a little bit and exploring your own movement, which is why I shared that kind of freaky dance video a couple of days ago, just to show you that like it doesn't have to be this restrictive set movement. Like I still class that dance thing as yoga for me. So yeah, and yeah, the other thing with all of that is that it can actually lead to some like sexual abuse as well, from gurus, because they have this like sense of authority. But that's more going into the tantra side of things, which I will be talking about next week. Okay, yeah, so Hatha Yoga, which is what is most commonly practiced now. So like most yoga classes you go to are based upon the Hatha Yoga tradition, because there's many different traditions in yoga itself. And these are mostly based on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and other quite ancient texts such as the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And these all sort of come from the Vedas, which are the super ancient texts of yoga. But it's really important, like if you go through these and study the history of them a little bit, women are basically only mentioned, well, the one that I found most amusing was that we are like a polluting presence when we're bleeding. So our menstrual blood is like evil, basically, and should be avoided at all costs. The other one is that we are a distracting presence. So like, don't be around women. They're going to take you away from your spiritual practice. And the other time that we're mentioned is being very useful in sexual rituals. So yeah, it's a bit disappointing, really. And there are, like, don't get me wrong, there are like occasionally a woman's voice in these texts, or, you know, there's theories that texts are sort of written by women through their husbands or whatever. And there's also like a bit of a grammatical thing, that maybe they sort of say he, like as in he, not he, in the context of like meaning he and she, and it's just like a grammatical thing that they just say he and they're including the feminine in that. But it's also kind of like that is one point, but it's kind of a bit of a moot point in my opinion, because the practice are all really clearly created for men, by men. So yeah, I'm not like a complete authority on this, by the way. I'm not a historian of yoga. I've just done like quite a bit of research myself. So yeah, don't take what I'm saying here as law. And there's like thousands of different like arguments and theories on all of this stuff. Of course, it's ancient history, so there's no real deciding what is true and what isn't. It's just theories, basically. But going on from that to a really cool theory, they found in the Indus Valley civilization archaeological evidence which dates back to about 1500 BCE. And they found these like really cool little like statue carvings of what is often claimed to be men and like the origins of yoga, but it's quite clearly, in my opinion, depictions of like pregnant women doing like deep squats and things like that in order to prepare for childbirth. And that's a very, like, you know, it's not just me that thinks that's a very established feminist approach to the whole history. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that, like, maybe the origin of some of our asanas and poses were actually from things that women were just doing back then to prepare for birth. I mean, the whole birthing process now is so like medicalized and almost synthetic in a way that women just aren't empowered at all to like prepare their bodies for birth through practices and all that kind of thing. It's kind of just like, get pregnant, go to hospital, and a doctor will sort you out, usually a man. And it just, yeah, it doesn't sit right with me, especially when you see that like in so many prenatal yoga classes now, like pregnancy yoga classes, as well, that women are doing the same poses that we saw. Hey Megan, hey Jade, thanks for joining, so lucky to have you here, thank you. Yeah, women are quite clearly doing these poses that is preparing them for birth, so why would that not have been the case, you know, thousands of years ago? It just kind of makes sense to me personally, but yeah, so I think that's pretty awesome. And what I'm getting at here is that I quite strongly believe that a lot of the origins of yoga come from women and what women were just doing naturally because of these life cycles that we have. Menstrual cycles, menopause, and the mature years or the wise woman years. There's lots of things that we have to do spiritually, physically, and mentally to prepare ourselves to go through these changes every month and over the years. So we were just naturally kind of almost forced to do these practices that are coming from yoga. And then the men were kind of a bit what's going on here? Why are women becoming kind of, enlightened and connected to spirit, connected to the Mother Earth, connected to all these different powers of menstruation and ovulation and birthing children and lactating, feeding other humans from their body. When you actually think about it in those terms, even the ability to carry sorry if this is a bit triggering, but to carry death inside us with miscarriage, that is a power in itself to be able to go through that process. And even within our whole menstrual cycle, we kind of have this whole cycle of birth and death as well. Coming out in spring and then falling away in winter. This is all incredibly powerful stuff. And in yoga, there's the siddhis, which are sort of the superpowers that you gain from doing lots of practice. So things like levitating and clairvoyance and all of these other things, which I personally haven't witnessed. So my jury's still kind of out a little bit. I don't not believe in it, but I don't fully believe in it. I guess I do. I don't know. I don't know where I'm really at with that. But what I find really more interesting at this stage in my life is the female siddhis, the female powers, and how maybe men were seeing all of these powers that we have and were, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but definitely intrigued by what we were experiencing and trying to replicate that for themselves. And I don't know if any of you are mothers out there, but apparently the experience of childbirth can be incredibly spiritual. And even the men in the room can kind of feel it when people are really kind of engaged in the whole birthing process. So yeah, I think men wanted to pick up on that a little bit. And on this whole note, one final point is that many of these ancient civilizations as well used to worship the goddess. It's only really with Christianity, or pre-Christianity, I suppose, Judaism and things like that, that worship of gods came in. And of course there's gods in Hinduism as well. But it's just interesting that, back in the day, the goddess was predominantly worshipped. That's really clear in ancient civilizations. And the reason for that, women basically became the symbol of the goddess because we had this power to create life from our bodies, birth it, and create a new human. How crazy is that? When you actually think about it, it's crazy. And incredibly powerful and beautiful. And, back then when we didn't have all this information, that was so revered and mind-blowing that a human could do that. So women were literally worshipped as a symbol of Mother Earth, basically, the creator of Earth itself, of the universe. So yeah, I reckon that yoga comes from women in conclusion. And of course there's male influences there, and I'm not dissing the males, by the way. I'm just dissing the approach that women basically weren't even allowed to contribute to a lot of these ancient yogic texts, and they were kind of shunned a bit when it's quite clear that women were very possibly the inspiration for most of the yogic practices that we do. Oh, thanks for commenting there, Jade. Yeah, childbirth absolutely is a spiritual experience. Well, I'm yet to have that experience myself, but I'm actually looking forward to it. I used to kind of dread having children because of the whole pregnancy, childbirth thing. It all looked really scary and horrendous, but doing all this work that I've been doing around menstrual healing yoga and my online course and my coaching, I'm just getting more and more excited about creating a human inside of me. I think it's really awesome. So yeah. All right, I will leave it there. But next week, on a more hopeful note, we're going to be diving a little bit into Tantra and the history of Tantra. And that actually has a way better kind of feminist, inclusive history to it. So I'm pretty excited to share that with you all. Alrighty. And yeah, the last thing was, I don't know if you saw my post yet, but I'm doing the Menstrual Healing Circle again at the end of this month, and the theme for this month is yoga, or like kind of feminist yoga. So yeah, check that out. And there's 2 circles this time, one that's going to suit people in Australia and Europe, and then one that's going to suit people in Australia and the United States of America. So hopefully you'll all be able to join. I think I'll see lots of you there, hopefully. And remember, lots of you still have a free class pass, and it's only $7 to join if you don't. So yeah, and what's that comment from Jade? Lots of pain and kind of scary, but it's incredible, really. Oh yeah, that's exciting. My mum said she'd become more in tune with her sixth sense when she had children. Ooh, that just gave me goosebumps. That must be true. That's really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jade. That's really incredible. Alrighty, I will leave it there. Love you so much. See you next time. Bye.